IPMNation.com.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are thought, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a New Yorker.
Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Dr. John Rich, and you've tuned in to Dr. John's Neighborhood. Thanks for tuning in yet again. I continue to be grateful. I start out every show by talking about how grateful I am just because I have this platform and I have the ability to reach out to smart people and talk to them about the work that they're doing. I have a couple interesting guests coming up in the next few weeks. Senator Carrie Evelyn Harris, well, not senator yet, but she's running for Senate in Delaware. She's my first political candidate that I'll be interviewing, so that's kind of exciting. I don't know how that's going to go, but we'll see. She's a pretty interesting person. And today I have a psychologist who's going to talk about college readiness. I'll introduce her in a second. I want to remind you that if you want to reach out to me with ideas for future episodes or articles for the website, you can find me at info@drjohnrich.com. That's associated with my website at drjohnrich.com, where you can also find information about my new book called Positive Parenting. Please also get in touch with me if you're having any issues. I have a small number of counseling slots available. Those are starting to fill up, but if you are having trouble with a transition or in your relationship or with your children and you just need a non-judgmental ear to listen to you, I'd be happy to discuss that with you. So on the line today, we have Dr. Debby Fogelman. Say hi, Debbie.
Hi, John.
Yeah. So, Debbie, you reached out to me, and the main thing that you got going on that we're going to talk about today is the stuff that you do for getting emotionally ready for college. Can you tell us what that website address is and what it's all about?
Yes, I created this website because I saw a need for emotional preparation for college. I saw that so much emphasis was being placed on, preparation to take the standardized test and the grades and the resume, that very little emphasis was being placed on the emotional preparation. And so kids were going off to college ill-prepared. So kids that were self-confident and high achievers in high school, when they went off to college, they seemed to really struggle with self-doubt and insecurity and even their likability. And this was really surprising. And so I created this program so kids can be more resilient. They can have a stronger kind of emotional core so they can withstand the normal stresses that arise during this stage of development.
So in your opinion, to what degree is this transition or this period of instability that a lot of people go through a result of not being there in the house with parents around providing a safe place? Now all of a sudden they're adults and they're out on their own and panic sets in. Is that an accurate description for some?
Well, you know what? I think it might simplify it, but it definitely is a factor because the need to feel protected is it's a basic human need, and it's actually one of the conditions that is needed for a child to internalize a sense of self-worth. And I make a distinction between self-worth and self-esteem. And this is very much a part of my program because I believe that kids are going into college with low self-worth. And that means that they don't have the foundation, a stable foundation on which a strong self-esteem can develop. And because of that, when they experience challenge and these new demands, and they experience disappointments and setbacks and even failures, they have a very hard time coping because their self-esteem becomes devastated. They feel hopeless and they feel worthless. But in order to internalize self-worth, it is something that happens very early on in development, and safety and protection absolutely is a factor. But I believe that more serious factors now are social media, and I can talk about that more in a little bit, and also the increased competitiveness of college admissions.
Okay.
And also bullying, cyberbullying.
So let's back up. I know that you, in some way, distinguish between self-esteem and self-worth, but for somebody who's not a psychologist, maybe they need it to be a little more concrete. So could you maybe make it, let's paint a picture of Johnny. Let's say Johnny. And what is the self-esteem component for Johnny, and what is the self-worth component for Johnny?
Okay. So self-worth is an internalized belief that you are an acceptable, worthwhile human being.
Okay.
If you don't internalize self-worth, you feel, and self-esteem is conscious. You have a sense, when you feel good and feel confident, and when you're filled with self-doubt, you are aware of that. But with self-worth, it is very unconscious, because this is a process. I mean, the foundation of self-worth begins, from birth, pretty much. It spans, it spans those formative years. If you don't internalize a feeling of self-worth, you at your core feel deficient, you feel inadequate, and you can even feel defective. You feel that there's just something not good enough about you, that you are less than what other people are, and that is the foundation of a self-esteem, because self-confidence and self-esteem can ebb and flow. If you do well on a test, if you perform well, okay, you're going to feel good about yourself. If you don't perform as well as you wanted, you're going to be disappointed, and so your self-esteem is going to suffer. So self-esteem is more affected by external factors, whereas self-worth is something innate. It is really unconscious, and I've also found in my private practice that it really is unconscious. If you broach the possibility that maybe self-worth is lacking, it will be like emphatically denied.
Okay.
Just acknowledging that low self-worth might exist, it produces shame.
Right. Yeah. Everyone's supposed to be happy, right? Yeah. That's the goal of life, is for everyone to be happy 100% of the time.
Yeah, and if you have a negative experience and you don't feel happy, for a person that actually has self-worth, they'll recover from that. Yeah. It is transitory, but because feelings are transitory. But for a person that has an internalized self-worth, that negative experience is taken as confirmation of some deficiency, that there's something wrong with them. And then of course that leads to, feeling hopeless, and that's the ingredients for, anxiety and depression.
Yeah. So in my classroom, when I'm talking about, it sounds like to some degree you're talking about attributions. You're talking about when something good happens to me, do I attribute it to my own hard work or my own worthiness? Do I take credit for it? And when I make a mistake, do I make excuses, or do I blame myself? So to what degree is attribution involved in this distinction you're trying to make?
Okay. So that is an attribution, and, that's the language that you're using.
Yeah.
The language that I use is perceptual biases. So the equivalent to that, to making, these external or internal, attributions, would be, let me think about this. It would be ideal. It would be like we all engage in these biases. We have a whole bunch of cognitive biases, and there was a psychologist, Aaron Beck, that actually kind of pioneered this idea, and then David Burns made it more accessible to the general public because he actually gave names to these different, biases. Mm-hmm. So there's a tendency to, if you have low self-worth, there's a tendency to engage in these biases, these negative types of thinking. So someone with low self-worth has a tendency to idealize others and devalue themselves, or to magnify the achievement of others but minimize their achievement.
Yeah.
So it is the same. It's just that I'm using different language.
Yeah, yeah. So I like to talk with my students about when I was in middle school. I did not feel very good about myself, especially in the area of athletics. But just generally, I had not been raised in an environment that was conducive to me feeling very worthy as a person. So I remember in gym class where we would play softball, and maybe there was a big part of the game. We only needed one more out to win or something like that. And I try to paint the picture that I was out there in right field, and trust me, that's where they always put me, in right field. Rightly so. Yeah. But I'd be in right field, and I'd be thinking to myself, please don't hit it to me, please don't hit it to me, please don't hit it to me. And then there were other people that I could tell, just the way that they were like crouched down and getting ready for whatever was about to happen, that perhaps that they were thinking to themselves, just hit it to me and I'll take care of it.
Yes.
Like that's a, and then of course if the ball gets hit to me, I'm so anxious that I'm going to mess up, that I probably mess up. This other person is in a much better position to make the catch or to get the out or to throw the ball correctly or whatever.
That's true, because you're talking about expectations and how expectations, like invariably become self-fulfilling prophecies, because you just expected that you would not succeed.
Yeah.
You just expected, whereas the other person on the field had confidence in his ability to succeed. So he would do anything to go, for the ball. He would do nothing to inadvertently sabotage, or anxiety wouldn't be so high that it actually undermined performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the difference is when low self-worth is internalized, there's a lack of self-efficacy. There's a feeling that you're not going to succeed, that you're not a competent person, that you can't prevail, that you can't overcome adversity. It's just, it's so innate and it's so debilitating and it's so insidious.
Yeah. Well, and then even more than that, when I draw this example, and we'll get back to college in a second, I'm going to tie it in. Let's say that the ball is hit to me and I drop it. That's just a confirmation that I'm no good. Yes. But if the ball is hit to the other guy who's ready and wants the ball to get hit to him and is feeling confident and he drops it, he doesn't say, I'm a worthless piece of crap.
Yes.
And he doesn't change his entire opinion about himself. He thinks to himself, what is it that I did wrong so that next time the ball gets hit to me, I can succeed. It's a totally different mindset.
Absolutely, because a person that has low self-worth, whatever they do, they're wanting to confirm or disconfirm an internal belief. So the internal belief is, I am insufficient, I'm inadequate, I'm a failure. That's the internal belief. So everything is almost like a test to confirm, that isn't true and to disconfirm that it is true.
Yeah.
And so this is why that that meaning is assigned to that event, whereas someone that doesn't have low self-worth isn't going to make all these attributions. They're just going to look at it realistically and reasonably, which is, well, you can't catch them all. Next time I'll do better.
Yeah.
Perhaps my position, I'm not a sports person. So,
Yeah.
but, they'll, like you say, I mean, they'll come up with very reasonable explanations, but they're not going to internalize this as confirmation of being deficient.
Yeah. And so let's make this the last way that we tie this back to college. And you talked about self-sabotage. So that's little Johnny, right, who at the ball, here comes the ball. What is he likely to do to try to give himself an out for his impending failure?
I don't think I understand the question.
Oh,
Are you
okay,
talking about in real time?
Well, yeah, so you're talking about self-sabotage, and so it seems like, he can not be paying attention, so that if the ball gets hit to him, then he doesn't have to say that it's because he's so terrible.
John, in that context, I'm not really sure, because I was thinking more of self-sabotage as not even participating.
Mm-hmm.
That the fear would be so great, the fear of failure, that there would be a reluctance to participate. There would be a fear to try something new, to challenge, to pursue an opportunity, because they would be afraid of failing. They would be afraid of putting their competence to the test.
I see.
So I see procrastination as being a form of sabotage as well.
Nice, great. Yes. And so when I've talked about this with my students, I said sometimes I find that there are students, and in my opinion, if they just put the work in, they could probably do a lot better. But instead, they smoke weed before the test, or they don't bother studying. And then when they fail at the test, they can say, well, I didn't even care about the test. The test is stupid. School is stupid, all that stuff. So they're getting in their own way.
Exactly. They're getting in their own way. Exactly. They can say to themselves, if I would have applied myself, I have succeeded. But deep down, they do not believe that they're capable of succeeding. They do believe that they will fail. And so they really don't want to put in the effort, because then they will get their confirmation of whether or not they are adequate. But they don't realize, like you realize, and like anyone else looking at the situation would realize, is that the reason they are likely to fail is because they don't put in the effort. That's why they're failing. If they would just apply themselves, they would likely succeed. Yeah. But there's also there's another part to it as well, because there seems to be this belief that unless you are perfect and the best, you are a failure. So I don't think that young adults now recognize that there are degrees of success. If you're not the best, you might as well be the worst. I see that as being an attitude, and this definitely adds to the fear of failure.
Right. Second place is first loser. I've heard that.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, so that's very interesting. But then on the other hand, if you don't self-sabotage, so let's say here comes Dr. Fogelman. Dr. Fogelman is going to give me some therapy and try to talk to me about taking the risk. I'm in school and I've been self-sabotaging, but you have the ability to succeed. So just give it a shot and see what happens. What if I give it a shot and I still fail the test? Is that a danger that the person is now going to have their entire earth come shattering down over their head, that you just shown me that my worst fears were actually true?
Okay. So if someone came to me, it would never be as simple as that, because what I would do, and this is where the change needs to happen, is I would actually provide psychoeducation.
Okay.
I would provide education about what low self-worth is and what the origins are. Because for people that have low self-worth, they have mistakenly come to this conclusion. Okay, they have convinced themselves that they are deficient or defective. So the reason why the psychoeducation is so important is because I can provide education about the conditions that are needed to internalize self-worth. And when they understand what these conditions are, they can disidentify from the feeling and start considering the possibility that, okay, so these conditions weren't met, so this is why they feel this way. And because they feel this way is not an indication of a truth. It's just how they came to make sense of why these conditions weren't met, of why they had the experience that they had. And I will also, educate about, the cognitive ability of a child, and that a child is not capable of drawing anything other than simple cause-effect conclusions.
Yes.
And children automatically assume that they are responsible, that it is their fault. So if they can recognize that, no, this is just the false conclusions that they have drawn, okay, we can start working on the self-worth. And once the stronger emotional core, a disappointment is not going to, well, hopefully the goal is a disappointment is not going to be experienced as an indication of them being a failure. Hopefully they'll be able to understand and have a different experience, that if they feel disappointment, they're not going to experience shame because they now have a stronger emotional core, and so they're less vulnerable to those experiences, that a disappointment is just a disappointment. It doesn't mean anything else. Continue to try, continue to persevere, and you will improve, because that's just like the natural order of things. Even if you're not great at something, you can always improve at something if you put effort into it.
Yeah, and in fact, a mistake or a disappointment can be an opportunity to succeed later, or to learn something about how to do it differently next time, get back on the saddle, that kind of thing.
Exactly. You can understand what you did wrong, because recognizing that you did something wrong or you made a mistake is not internalized as being a failure. It doesn't have to be denied. You don't have to reject the idea that you could have made a mistake, because you're not assigning that meaning to making a mistake. Making a mistake does not mean that you are a mistake, that you're a broken person, that you're a failure. It just means that you can make some adjustment to your action and do it differently so you get a different result next time.
Great. So now I'm already starting to think about the connection to most of the work that I do is with parenting. And I, of course, advise parents to treat their children like they're human beings and not use violence against them and not insult them and berate them and try to make them feel terribly about themselves. That when they make a mistake, that you can address the mistake without making comments that conflate their entire self-worth with the mistake that they made. Like, you did this and I wish you had done it this way, as opposed to, you did this and that's just another example of how terrible you are and why I wish I had never had you, and all these other kinds of things that are going on. So it's got to be difficult to take somebody who has created a self-worth narrative as a result of how their parents talk to them, and then help them to shift the narrative so that they can move forward and not allow all of that garbage that they've been fed growing up to continue to impact them.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, that's undeniable. It is. It's very difficult. And, sadly, not everyone can overcome. I mean, if people are unaware that at the core there's low self-worth, they're not going to work towards overcoming it. And overcoming low self-worth is definitely the secret to success. So sadly, not everyone is going to overcome low self-worth because they are not aware that this is what the issue is. And so they'll continue to personalize and internalize failure.
Yeah.
So you're right. I mean, it is very difficult. But what needs to happen, and I know that this is simplifying, but really what needs to happen is these young adults now need to provide for themselves what wasn't provided in childhood by their caregivers. And that is, they have to give themselves opportunities to feel pride and achievement. They have to feel pride.
Okay.
In who they are and what they do.
Yeah.
And over time, those experiences of pride grow and grow and eventually, create this feeling of self-efficacy and optimism and self-love.
Great. So let's go into your practice now. And let's, I know you have to keep confidentiality, so of course I'm not asking you to use any names, but maybe you can give us some kind of like an amalgam of a story of somebody who comes to your practice and you're going to work with them so that when they go off to college, they're going to be more resilient in the face of this difficult transition. Do you think you can do something like that? Like paint, here they come in and this is the first thing we're going to do. These are some of the other activities we're going to do. Or, how are you going to work with somebody if they come to you?
Okay. Well, I'm going to do a lot of psychoeducation. And like I said before, I'm going to talk about what low self-worth is and help them to identify whether or not it exists. I'm going to educate them about the conditions that need to be met. So they realize that it's, that their feelings of insecurity, like I said before, are not an indication of some truth that they are, inadequate, but rather just the conclusions that they drew that have now created this false internal belief.
Yeah.
I'm also going to provide education about how once an internal belief is set, it kind of creates a filter of inadequacy and everything is seen through this filter. And so there's a tendency now to believe that no matter what you do, it's never enough and who you are is insufficient. And this now is self-imposed through this filter. So then we're going to look at the type of negative thoughts or perceptual biases that exist. They've really been kind of articulated very clearly by David Burns. And I have found that when I do education and I make my clients aware of these perceptual biases, they can actually recognize which ones they engage in. As soon as they start to recognize that, they can really look and see, is there real objective evidence or are they just reasoning from their emotions? Very often I will say to, I'll say to a client, well, how do you know? And they will say, well, I know because I feel it.
Okay.
And we have to really make this distinction between feelings are not truth. They're not an indication of reality. Feelings come from their own thoughts. Their own thoughts generate their feelings. And so you can't necessarily trust feelings.
Yeah. But it sounds like in your role, you sometimes have to challenge people. They have these set beliefs, and then you have to confront them with the idea that the way that they're thinking about themselves is bullshit. So does that make you the bad guy sometimes? Is there ever a time where somebody will then turn their anger on you as a result of your confrontation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, fairly often.
Fairly often. All right.
It happens very often. Well, it's really uncomfortable. It creates this cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Where you're saying one thing and the person is truly believing something else, and you can't have two opposing beliefs. You can't hold them at the same time without it creating some internal conflict. You have to reconcile it. And so one way to reconcile that would be to accuse me of lying, being deceptive.
Well, that's fascinating. Can you think of a specific, again, holding confidentiality, can you think of a specific story? And not so much that it'll identify the person, but like here comes a person and then this is the belief, this is what they said, and then this is how I confronted it. To make it more concrete, a particular belief that a person had or something that they interpreted that was a platform for you to educate them about how they're interpreting something in a way that's not necessarily factual.
I keep associating to an experience that I had with a client, and I'm hoping it's somewhat related.
Okay.
I'm hoping it is, since it's my association.
Sure.
But this might answer the question, at least, indirectly. But I had an experience with a client who I complimented him, and it was a real compliment. I mean, I was genuinely impressed about something.
Yeah.
And his reaction was rage. Rage towards me. And he was raging, and he was yelling at me, and almost pleading, though, not to do that, not to say that, because he didn't believe it to be true. And he thought that I was kind of teasing him, that I was just trying to inflate his ego,
I see,
only to humiliate him.
Oh, wow. I mean, I can't imagine that a psychologist worth her salt, that would be your intention. So that's got to have deep roots there, right? That's just an example of, an internal belief system, eternal belief that I am absolutely worthless. So I can't believe what you're saying. And so he needed to assign some meaning to it. The meaning was, you're doing this intentionally only because you want me to feel even worse than I already do. So it's a manipulation. So you were saying, wow, you did really well at that, or I'm impressed that you were able to accomplish that. And then his expectation is, well, that can't be true. I know that that's not true, that I'm good at anything. So the only reason for her to be saying that is so that I'll feel really good about myself, and then she can pull the rug out from under me and make me feel worse. That's what he's saying?
Yeah, it's exactly. And it's not even conscious. This happens unconsciously, but this was the meaning that he assigned to the event, to the incident. And
Well, how about that? So that, were you able to dive deeper? Like, does that come from a person in his family who used to do that very thing?
So I have been working with this client for a couple of years, and yes, it takes time. But that low threshold for experiencing shame, because that was that rageful response, was shame, definitely would work. Like, over time, it starts to dissipate, where you can feel the prick of the ego, you can feel the suspicion, but you don't automatically go to that feeling of shame.
Yeah.
And it takes time. This is why I'm actually hoping that my college preparation program can, I think it would be valuable even to really start this, several years before college, so you can start addressing, insecurities that that exist, because these things can't be resolved overnight. They take, a lifetime to develop, and you can't just reverse them or resolve these issues quickly. It takes time to resolve them.
Yeah. So let me shift the focus here just for a second, because I'm thinking, from my psych background, that it's reasonable to say that there are 1,000 ways that a person could be a psychologist. You could be a psychologist and focus on the biological side. You could focus on the developmental side, the educational side. In the field of clinical psychology, you could be, what you could care most about are marriages, or depression, or anxiety, or some type of more severe mental illness. And so when a person like you latches on to a particular topic, there must be a personal reason why that has become your passion. So are you able to unpack that at all? Why this particular topic? How does that fit into your life trajectory?
Mm-hmm. So part of the requirement of being in a doctoral program for clinical psychology is that you undergo your own therapy.
Yeah.
Which is very helpful because, it gives you insight into who you are and, what your motivations are and why you feel the way you do and why you may react very strongly to, a certain situation, what your personal triggers are. And yes, I do think that I gravitated towards this because it was something that I could identify with.
Okay.
So I am the oldest of five children, and there's 18 months between my sister and I, and then there's a big gap, and I have 3 younger brothers, and there's 15 years between myself and the youngest. And when my mother was pregnant with the first of my younger brothers, she was told, she was mistakenly informed by the doctor that the baby was deformed.
Oh.
And so she was very preoccupied during her pregnancy. And as a child, this is what, I came to understand, and this is the inspiration, part of my personal inspiration for this program is, as a child only capable of drawing these very, simple cause-effect conclusions, I did not know what was going on, but I just felt that my mother was no longer available. She had kind of emotionally disappeared, and I thought it was because she saw something about me that was repugnant to her.
Wow.
And that she couldn't love me.
Uh-huh.
And as a child in first grade, I think it was, I cried every single day for months until eventually I was taken to a psychologist, and I was too young to even remember what happened. But there was just one incident. There was an incident that happened after that where I just didn't cry, and it was my grandmother. I had to complete a project, and it was a Sunday night, and she would come over on Sunday nights, and I was very anxious and upset. I hadn't completed the project, and she said to me, "Don't worry, I'm going to finish it for you." I think it was like a sewing project, and she just had to do the final touches and put the pieces together. And I went to sleep, and I woke up the next morning, and I saw it sitting in my room, and I expected to start crying, and I almost forced out tears, and they didn't come.
Okay.
That was such a turning point for me. I mean, clearly that wasn't the only incident. It must have been the therapy combined with that. But that doll that she completed, that gesture of completing the doll, I think must have meant to me that she cared enough for me, that I really was lovable for her to have actually exerted that, to have done that, to have put the energy into doing that for me. And I think that was very salient.
Wow, that's really powerful and courageous of you to share that with the hundreds of people who are listening to this and you don't even know who they are. I appreciate that.
We all have the same struggles. I think deep down we're all wanting, to feel that we really are perfectly acceptable and lovable the way we are.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I saw a therapist because I get therapy on a pretty regular basis. Not even if I have a particular problem, just because I find it useful to have somebody to listen to me and to unpack anything that I want to unpack. And there was a guy who used to like to use a phrase that you're precious and worth loving. And even though there was the masculine side of me recoiled a little bit at the word precious because it seems not so masculine or whatever, it really did touch me to think of it that way and to recognize in my own past, that I had a father who was chronically depressed and was not always nice and not always complimentary of me. I have my own stories about things that he said that still sting a bit. But I always like to say to people, and you tell me if you have another way of expressing this, that if you're going to take psychology seriously, you have to have a tremendous amount of courage because you have to face some things that your brain would rather not dredge up.
Yeah, no, that is true. it can be uncomfortable. Clearly, it can be uncomfortable because it forces you to remember, and when you remember, obviously the feelings associated with those memories, like you say, do get dredged up and they do cause discomfort, and people have a natural tendency to want to move away and avoid discomfort.
Yeah.
And so you really have to fight, you have to fight the urge to do that. And so it takes a lot of fortitude.
Yeah. Great. So we're going to move in the direction of wrapping up the conversation. And so I wanted to talk about the takeaways that people out there might have. It was a great conversation, but we didn't specifically talk about the parent side versus the student side. If there are parents or people who are about to go to school or people who are in school who might want to come and talk to you or use one of your services, what might be the takeaway that you would want them to have as a result of listening to the program? Start with the parent of a college-age student and then talk about the student, him or herself.
Okay. So for the parent, just to recognize that this is an adjustment for your kids, and so they very well could, have some emotional difficulty adjusting. And if that does happen, and you do discover that one of the reasons is that your child just really does, in fact, have low self-worth, is not to necessarily blame yourself, because for the most part, parents do love their children. They do want the best for their children. And sometimes they unfortunately do undermine their children's self-confidence by wanting to do too much, by wanting to be too good. And I see one of the reasons being the competitiveness of college admission is that because it is so competitive, we want to give our children a competitive edge.
Yeah.
And so we want to spare them or protect them from the natural consequences of their actions. And we also want them to be super impressive on paper so they can distinguish themselves from everyone else. And one way to do this is by really micromanaging their lives. And so we are undermining their confidence and their competence and their self-reliance, even though we really come from a good place. And then from the student's perspective, just for them to understand that change always requires an adjustment, and even change that's exciting, like going off to college, it requires adjusting to a new reality, and there are and greater challenges. And just because you have moments of self-doubt, that is normal. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your choice or wrong with you. And you just have to be patient, because just like grief, has to be processed and people adjust to the new reality of losing someone on their own timeline. Embedded in change is loss and adjusting to a new reality. And so you have to expect that you are going to have moments of sadness and loneliness and self-doubt and insecurity, and that is perfectly normal. It is nothing to feel panicked about. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong, but to manage your stress, and you should do these things proactively to manage your stress, because stress is only going to exacerbate negative thinking and self-defeating behaviors. So you want to be aware not to procrastinate, to keep on top of things. You have to get enough sleep. You have to exercise. You have to be mindful of what you eat, because when you have, a diet that has these sugar crashes and you're physically uncomfortable, your level of frustration tolerance is a lot lower when you're just physically uncomfortable. So take steps, to manage your, anxiety. and seek out help if you are lonely. If you're not comfortable, confiding to your parents, go to the college counseling center. Honestly, there is no shame, but talking about the source of stress is very helpful and really necessary.
Yeah. Great. I love it. That's fantastic. I mean, there's so many more things to talk about. There's the social media piece that we never touched, and how people are somehow communicating with hundreds of social media friends and yet feel lonely. There's the importance of recognizing and learning to recognize when you're feeling an emotion so that you can label it and evaluate it and then use strategies to try to help. And then there's also all sorts of, the alcohol that's around and the drugs that are around and the kinds of things that can alter mood. So it's, it sounds to me like you're doing really important work, and I would encourage people out there to come to you if they're interested in the training that you provide. So can you tell them, remind us, how do we find you? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not really accepting new clients at this juncture. So it's really my program.
Okay.
And it is online. And I would really encourage. The reason I created the program is because there's so much material that it couldn't be done in an article. It would just be a manuscript. The article would be so long. So I kind of created this program and I broke it down into different categories. And I just think that the program as a whole is very, very helpful. And because there's so much information, is to go through it really slowly so the information can be processed and internalized, and to complete it, to really complete it, because each section has something valuable to offer. It's free. Mm-hmm. It can be downloaded. So there's really no reason why, everyone really couldn't access and make use of this program.
Great. So how do people find it?
They go to www.preparetoleavethenest.com.
Mm-hmm.
And on my website, I have articles as well that address these issues. I actually just currently posted an article that's titled "How to Keep Stress from Turning into Anxiety and Depression." And that article has been well received.
Great. Well, we can talk after the show about maybe you'd be willing to put a link to this conversation on the site, or let people know about the stuff that I've written about as well. Some of it is connected to some of the things that you've been talking about. But I appreciate the work that you're doing out there. I once again love this opportunity that I have with this podcast to talk to people who are making a positive difference. And the fact that you're putting out this stuff that would cost people probably thousands of dollars in therapy sessions and not asking for any money is quite a tribute to your altruism. So we all appreciate that.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah. So thanks for being on the show. And I want to thank you listeners for tuning in. We will come back next week. I'm not sure exactly who is going to be on the show next week, but we have a number of really interesting guests lined up, most of whom are doing things with parents. We do have a teenage girl who's doing some interesting work in her high school that we're going to be talking about. So continue to tune in to Dr. John's Neighborhood. Once again, reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns, want to talk about things that are going on. info@drjohnrich.com. I will catch all of you next week. Bye.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are felt, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a new IPMNation.com